Hey everybody! In this video I'm going to be giving you my review for Battlefield 5. So a few things I want to set up here before we get too deeply into the review proper. One of which is I'm going to be talking exclusively about the PC version of the game that's available on Origin. Because I both have no access to any of the console versions of the game, nor do I have any desire to review those. I've been a pretty enthusiastic fan of the Battlefield series since Battlefield 2 back in 2005 on the PC, and for me this has always been a game series that's best played and best experienced on the PC with a mouse and keyboard. Now, as somebody who's pretty familiar with most of the games in this series, I definitely have some personal favorites. For me, Battlefield Bad Company 2 essentially represents the pinnacle of the series in a lot of regards. That to me is the game that I really hold up and revere and kind of cherish as my quote unquote favorite Battlefield game. But I've certainly had quite a bit of fun over the years with various games in the series, and I can honestly say that there's never really been a game to bear the Battlefield name that I've played that I didn't have at least a somewhat favorable or positive opinion of on some level. For me personally, I felt that Battlefield 1 was a bit of a return to form for the series, incorporating a lot of features and functions and details that I feel had been absent from some of the games that directly preceded it. And I'm definitely happy to report that based on my 20 or so hours with Battlefield 5 so far, I believe that it is continuing the trend established by Battlefield 1 to good effect. Generally speaking, I'm pretty happy with what I've seen and experienced thus far in terms of level design, weapon and loadout configuration options, customization options, general gameplay dynamics, and the overall technical proficiency of the game. Now, that's not to say that Battlefield 5 is devoid of technical issues, as I've already experienced a fair share of collision, clipping, and minor rendering bugs, particularly with regard to on-foot traversal through some of the game's more elaborate infantry-focused environments. The good news, at least as far as I'm concerned, is that the technical problems I have run into have been infrequent enough that I don't believe that they detract from the overall experience of playing the game. And based on the history of the series and the tendency on DICE's part to constantly improve and refine the technical aspects of these games post-release, I'm not seeing anything in Battlefield 5 thus far that has me concerned for the long-term future or viability of the game. One thing that I should definitely make clear is that my particular focus when playing this game tends to be on infantry roles. So things like the assault, support, medic, and recon classes in multiplayer, as opposed to tank and aircraft operations or the single player war story content. For me, Battlefield has historically been a game series where I almost exclusively focus on competitive multiplayer when engaging with it, and I definitely see that continuing to be the case in Battlefield 5. As there's nothing that I personally find particularly compelling about the single player content present in the game at launch, or the upcoming Battle Royale mode that's slated to be introduced into the game early next year. For me, I'm mostly judging this game primarily on the experience of playing classic modes like Conquest and other prominently featured options such as the infantry focus rotation that incorporates the frontline, domination, and team deathmatch gameplay variants into a single playlist. And in that regard, I think Battlefield 5 is a pretty successful game. I've certainly had quite a bit of fun with it thus far, not only playing as a lone wolf or in the context of a pickup group in a squad, but also with more organized groups of friends using voice comms. To me, some of the things that most stand out as significant improvements in this game would be the much improved user interface and progression unlock system, both in terms of general presentation and the streamlined and more straightforward manner that information about how unlocks and progression work is conveyed to players. And I'm also a pretty big fan of the layout and flow and overall design aesthetic of most of the included maps at launch. A few of the bigger, more wide open vehicle focused maps are of course not going to be as appealing to me personally as someone who generally likes to focus on squad based infantry combat in these games. But even on those maps, it's pretty easy to find areas for individuals interested in engaging in that sort of gameplay. And of course, given the traditional emphasis on vehicular combat in Battlefield games, it's nice to see some improvements being made there, such as an increase in the effective inbounds aerial combat areas of most maps. Another small detail that I definitely have come to appreciate during my time with the game thus far is the increased focus on squad play and the general refinement of individual roles within the squad. I feel that much like in Bad Company 2, each individual squad role has at least one or two very specific things that it does better than any other role. Be it the accelerated revive time for medics, the spotting capabilities of the recon class, or the unique gadgets available to support players. I really like the way the game is tuned right now, especially factoring in things like the new attrition system that limits the availability and accessibility of ammo, healing items, and explosives, coupled with the dynamic environmental effects created by building things like fortifications and supply points. Are any of the changes in Battlefield 5 really earth-shattering or particularly dramatic? No, not really. But I do believe the cumulative effect of them is having an impact on my overall enjoyment of the game, and causing the overall experience to feel just a bit more fresh, engaging, and interesting than I found Battlefield 1 to be, for example. It's difficult for me to say at this point whether or not Battlefield 5 will evolve into a true successor to something like Bad Company 2 in my mind, because at this particular point in time we're at least a year away from all of the features and functionality and content that have been promised for the game being properly and fully implemented into it. And I know EA and DICE's strategy of rolling out the game content in segments over the course of the next year is something that has a lot of people fairly upset and has become a bit of a divisive issue with regard to this game. For me personally, I'm actually a fan of the strategy, as I believe that it will help keep the game relevant and infused with new content and experiences over the course of the next year. And at least at this point, I don't personally feel as though there's any shortage of content for me to experience during this launch period. To wrap things up here, I wanted to reluctantly acknowledge some of the drama that's been associated with this game with regard to claims of its historical inaccuracies. My personal take on the subject is that Battlefield has never been a particularly accurate series of games. While I think the argument could certainly be made that more effort was put into mirroring or mimicking historical events in previous games, I don't personally see that as being something sacred or untouchable. And I tend to feel that at the end of the day, the changes that EA and DICE have made to the game's historical context are generally good-natured and simply intended to increase the accessibility and potential appeal of the game to the wider, more diverse potential player base that this game may have by virtue of the expanded relevance of gaming in popular culture. I think it's been pretty thoroughly established at this point that EA and DICE's intention with both Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5 was to create an alternate history or alternate timeline take on the events of World War I and World War II. And that's something that I personally feel shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who's ever played a World War II game before. And to be honest, I kind of feel like most of the drama associated with this game is much ado about nothing, and part of an underlying current or tendency among certain fringe elements on the internet to turn molehills into mountains and create controversy whenever possible. At the end of the day, my take on Battlefield 5 is that it is a generally solid, fun, and enjoyable AAA first-person shooter experience. Does it currently sport some blemishes and technical flaws? Absolutely it does. But it's also a game that is going to be actively and aggressively developed, expanded, and refined over the next year or more. So it would of course be impossible for me to give you a definitive, complete take on the overall game. But for what it is, in the here and now, in this launch window, I'm having quite a bit of fun with it in its launch iteration and would definitely recommend it to fans of the series and fans of first-person shooters in general. I think there's a lot to like about this game, and I absolutely believe that it does more right than wrong. Having said all that, I'm going to bring this video to a close. Hopefully you folks have enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. If you'd like to see more videos from me in the future, be sure to hit subscribe, and I will see you next time.
Soldiers, objective Delta has been lost.